We move to Privatization of Federal Investigations, the U.S. Office of Personnel Management. Janice LaChance and Kathy Dilliman. Is that correct? Thank you both for coming.
Well, thank you very much. And as a director of OPM, I'd like to officially offer my predecessor here a job. So come work for the federal government before it's over with. In the early 1990s, OPM's investigations unit was plagued with problems. It was already a self-funding service to federal agencies by that time, and it had accumulated an intolerable $40 million debt, and it wasn't getting any better. So in December of 1994, the administration announced its decision to privatize the function. At that time, I was OPM's Director of Communications and a member of the original staff task force working on the issue. We considered a number of alternatives, including closing it completely, but we proposed, and our employees chose, to go the route of the first ever government employee stock ownership plan. I was OPM's Chief of Staff when the ESOP was implemented. This alternative allowed OPM to meet three goals. First, our customers, 100 federal agencies, had to receive the excellent service they had come to expect. Second, we insisted that the employees receive fair and compassionate treatment. Third, the solution would have to save taxpayer money. It also meant we had to absolutely protect sensitive and confidential information while retaining OPM's strong, well-established government policymaking and oversight role. Once OPM's employees made this daring decision, the key was proper implementation, and Kathy Dilliman was a leader in that frontline effort.
Thank you, Janice. To make the ESOP work, we had to focus on three areas. First and most important, our customers, the federal agencies who paid for our services. Background investigations are critical to the government's personnel security program. They're used to ensure that employees and contractors have the integrity to be trusted with our country's most sensitive information or hold positions of public trust. The stakes were high. Failure would have meant endangering the security of our borders and compromising the war on drugs. Failure could jeopardize the treatment of veterans in VA hospitals, endanger those who fly and rely on our air traffic control systems, or put our children at risk in federally sponsored child care facilities. Government agencies depended on us to provide thorough, timely investigations, but they too had tight budget constraints. Our challenge was to completely restructure our program in a way that kept it transparent to those agencies with continuing focus on quality, timeliness, and cost. To do that, our second focus had to be the staff. At that time, we had over 700 highly skilled employees. 250 of them were at the Operations Center in Western Pennsylvania, where I live and work. This was an area that was just recovering from the devastation of the slowdown in the steel industry. The final focus was the taxpayer. The savings from taking 700 people off the federal rolls would be meaningless if in the final analysis the costs of commercial services exceeded those of the federal effort, or if the sensitive information we gathered and maintained was put at risk. With no precedent to follow, it took 18 months to bring the ESOP to life. First, we had to surgically divide the program, separating those functions that were inherently governmental from those that could be provided by the commercial entity. Then, with the lines drawn, we had to develop a contract with the necessary safeguards to protect the government's interests and provide for oversight. And throughout the process, we maintained ongoing, continuous communication with our customers, the staff, their unions, and their congressional representatives. And now, almost 5 years later, the results proved that it worked. The transition was transparent to our customers. In fact, customer satisfaction has been measured every year, with approval levels rising from 64% then to over 90% now. Many new customers have been added, and most recently, the Department of Defense has asked us to help them out with their crisis of a backlog of over 500,000 security investigations. The ESOP has consistently met standards for quality and timeliness, and in the case of our most critical investigation, we've been able to roll back our prices to 1989 levels. The most important measure of success, though, was that every employee was offered the same job at the same salary with comparable benefits. Literally, one day in July 1996, they walked out losing their federal job on a Friday. Monday, they walked back into the same workplace, sat at the same desk, did the same job with the same level of devotion. The only difference was a signature on a paycheck. The added bonus was the taxpayer realized savings that were significantly higher than those projected.
We are often asked by other federal agencies if the creation of an ESOP can be replicated. And we think that our success proves that it can be done. We have no doubt that agencies with costly functions that can be conducted in the private sector can transfer those functions while ensuring a humane, soft landing for employees and retaining their strong and responsible oversight roles. It's a win-win. The government program gains flexibility without compromising quality and security. The employees keep the jobs they've been trained to do, and the taxpayer realizes the savings. Thank you for having us.
Thank you both. Questions, Antonio?
Help me understand. They're doing the same thing, getting the same salary, and improving just because they're no longer government employees?
What happened was, as a government employer, we did not have the flexibility to meet the demands of our market. As you recall, in the early 1990s, government employment was going down. We weren't getting nearly the number of cases to conduct background investigations on. The government wasn't hiring. We had a number of employees who were idle on a day-to-day basis. And because we could not compete with the private sector, we weren't able to go out and get additional customers, which is what this ESOP has done in the private sector. So in fact, we were able to meet all of our goals, and we are now 55% of their customer base. They've gone out and gotten some 2,600 private sector clients, and we're very, very proud of the work they do.
David Osborne. Okay, Susan.
I noticed in your application there's a reference to another government investigative agency that takes between 6 and 9 months to complete a national security investigation compared to the 30 days. Just question of clarification. There are lots of different levels of security classification, and different agencies require different levels, from compartmentalized clearance to just a basic access to confidential information. Is there some distinction here that I'm missing? Are these identical levels of classification,
No,
or identical levels of clearance here?
We compared apples to apples and oranges to oranges, and in fact, those are the exact kind of cases that we've been asked to help with just in the last several months.
Bill Claren.
As you know, I was not in favor of this program to begin with. When
Yes,
I was
sir, I
the
remember it
congressman from the
well.
district.
I think I sent you a letter.
I know, I'm sure you did. And that was because the employees of the government employees were not happy with the prospect of change. And I'm delighted to hear that, in fact, there seems to be a great deal of satisfaction. In fact, that's my question, is that I understand that after the ESOP went into effect, some of you stayed in the government service, others went on to the ESOP. Those who went on to the ESOP got enormous windfalls, at least in the first year or two.
Yes.
Didn't that create some tension or some conflict, shall we say, between those who stayed and those who left?
Well, as someone who stayed, maybe Kathy should address that.
Kathy, are you a private employer?
No.
I'm a federal employee, but I did have the choice. I was offered a position with the ESOP, and I chose to stay on the federal side of things. I think there were benefits to both sides, and fortunately, the people who remained federal were the people who had the most seniority, were the experts in their fields. They were doing a job they'd come to love to do. So, yeah, when the bonus checks came out, there was a little bit of gnashing of teeth, but they got over it really quickly.
Susan Hammer?
Am I to understand, well, let's look 10 years down the road. Am I to understand that there'll still be some government employees and some private or ESOP employees, and mainly because one of you said that some of the programs are inherently government?
Absolutely.
So so sort of this structure is it?
We think so. We think the ESOP can survive on its own, whether it has our business or not. As a matter of fact, we're going to recompete the contract over the next several months. But I think more importantly, what we have here is a great division between the different functions of government. We were able to separate out what could be done by the private sector, basically the fact-finding, the knocking on doors, making the inquiries about an individual's background, yet we were able to retain a strong role for the federal government in oversight, in contract management, in policy making. So we were able to distinguish and break apart what had been one program.
David Osborne.
This was a 5-year sole source contract. And our site reporter tells us that it it will be very hard for you to go with another company when you rebid this, that there are a lot of reasons why USIS will have a tremendous advantage. Most around the world, the average savings the first time a government service is bid out tend to be 20 to 25%, the very first time it's bid out. Your savings were much lower than that, and the private employees ended up getting the windfall. In retrospect, do you think it might have been better to break this into 2 or 3 contracts with 2 or 3 companies so that you would have had more price competition?
Well, I'll be glad to start that, and Kathy, since she was involved in the process. It's important to remember that we had 3 goals, and we weren't going down this road without meeting all 3 goals. And one of those was a soft and humane landing for our employees who were not at all at fault in how this whole process shook out. So it would have been possible to just, one of the options we considered was just letting them go and letting them hire on with private sector firms who are already doing this work. We just didn't think that that met the kind of standard that we had set for a soft landing, and certainly no one can argue with the fact that they've gotten the same pay, the comparable benefits, the same location. Nobody had to move unless they wanted to. The cost savings, I think, are going to continue to happen because I think by having the 5-year sole source contract, the idea was to let other private sector companies who do this kind of work ramp up so that they could compete as well. So I'm confident there'll be rigorous competition.
This next time, do you want 1 or 2 or 3? How many companies do you want to contract with?
I'm not sure we've made that decision yet. We're going to look at the process, what comes in. Obviously, what's important is also who's capable of doing the work. This isn't the kind of thing that you want to go back and clean up a mess. So we'll look at who comes in, their capability, the price, and we're going to do what's best for the taxpayer and the government.
Let me, time's up, but I'd like to ask you one more question.
Certainly.
Here we have an office in the government that is running a program in the deficit, and it is unable to break through government regulations, and it's unable to straighten out the program. And it finally says, we can't run this properly, and you spin it off and give it to a private company. The private company then turns around and figures out a way to make it work successfully. Now, we're being asked to give the award to the government group and not to the private company. Help me understand why we should do that.
Kathy's dying to answer that.
I am, because the private company didn't fix it. In 1994, when we hit rock bottom, at the same time privatization was being discussed, a core business group was pulled together and told to fix it. By the time we cut over in 1996, the feds had fixed it. There was a real question about whether we could sustain it, because we didn't have a good track record of sustaining. But we were not losing money and we had no deficit at the actual time of cutover.
And in fact, I think it's important to look at what was kept here and the kind of rigorous oversight and policy making that we conduct on a day-to-day basis, working in partnership with this company. But in fact, one of the ways the private sector company was able to fix it was by just going out and selling themselves and their capabilities to other customers.
Okay, the first sentence of your application says, we successfully converted a money-losing, dead-written federal national securities investigations operation into a private sector employee-owned employee stock option plan, which has been successful. That doesn't say that you ran this program, you fixed this program before it, and then you turned it over to the private company. It says you turned it over to a private company and they fixed it.
Well, what it says is that we turned it over to a private company who was able to be part of the solution, and that's maybe what we should have said. But in fact, what we did was look at the overall program, try to solve the problems, try to get to the best way to solve the problem, and creating the ESOP was the way to do it.
And it was the same team of people.
Why didn't you just keep it in the federal government if you'd fixed it?
Well, because we didn't have the ability to go out and get additional business the way the ESOP had solved it, and we had no way of predicting what the market would be. I mean, we didn't know. That was the problem. We couldn't react to the market that we had. We didn't know whether agencies were going to have a hiring burst anytime soon, and then we'd have to staff up, and then all of a sudden they stop hiring, and then we've got all these people sitting idle. That was our biggest fundamental problem. And because we were able to kind of contract and meet the needs of of those few years, we had no confidence in the fact that we'd be able to do it over the next several years.
Thank you. That was very helpful. It was very clarifying.
Thank you.
Thank you both.